The sound of heels clicking echoed through the marble hallway of Windsor Tech Corporation. Every employee straightened their posture, pretending to work harder the moment Madeline Windsor, the billionaire CEO, passed by. She was the face of power, perfectly tailored suit, cold confidence, and a reputation that left no room for mistakes. To most, she was untouchable. To herself, she was invincible, until one Monday morning, the day everything began to change. Madeline was preparing for a live investor meeting that could make or break her company. Billions were at stake, and her board was pressuring her to approve a merger she wasn't fully convinced about. But behind her composure was exhaustion, loneliness, and a deep, unspoken fear that she was losing control of the empire she'd built. While pacing near the lobby, she noticed Arthur, the night janitor, quietly mopping the floor. He was in his late 50s, kind eyes, weathered hands, a slight limp that spoke of a hard life. He never spoke much, never complained, and was invisible to most people in the building, and maybe that's why Madeline, trying to release her own stress, decided to talk to him, half as a joke, half out of frustration. "So, Arthur," she said with a smirk, "you've been working here longer than most of my managers. Tell me, what should I do with a billion-dollar merger? Approve it or walk away?" Arthur didn't stop mopping. He looked up slowly, his expression calm, not intimidated. "Well, ma'am," he said in a low, steady voice, "if you don't understand the value of what you already have, you'll never recognize what you're buying." Madeline blinked. She hadn't expected wisdom, certainly not from a janitor. "Excuse me," she asked. Arthur leaned on his mop handle. People rush to add more when they're afraid of losing what they've built. But sometimes, the real value isn't in expansion, it's in protecting the foundation. For a moment, the billionaire CEO was speechless. She laughed awkwardly, trying to shake it off. "That's interesting, Arthur. You sound like a philosopher." Arthur smiled faintly. "I've seen a lot of people lose everything, ma'am, money, family, peace. Not because they failed to grow, but because they forgot what really mattered." That night, Madeline couldn't sleep. Arthur's words replayed in her mind, louder than the advice of her lawyers and consultants. She pulled out an old photo from her desk drawer, her and her father, back when Windsor Tech was just a small garage startup. He had taught her hard work, integrity, and never to trade people for profits. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost that compass. The next day, Madeline found herself walking to the janitor's closet. "Arthur," she said softly, "can I talk to you again?" He nodded and put his mop aside. Over the next hour, they talked, not about mergers or stocks, but about life. Arthur told her about his late wife, how she'd taught him that the smallest acts of kindness could build the greatest fortunes. He shared how he'd once owned a small business, lost it all in the 2008 crash, and took the janitor job just to keep his dignity intact. Madeline listened, really listened, maybe for the first time in years. A week later, during the biggest board meeting of her career, everyone expected Madeline to approve the merger. The investors were impatient. Cameras were rolling, but when she stood at the podium, her words stunned the room. "Windsor Tech was built by people who believed in purpose before profit," she said. "We've forgotten that. I refuse to sign away our integrity for numbers on a spreadsheet. Instead, we're going to reinvest in our employees, in community programs, and in rebuilding trust from the ground up." The board went silent. Reporters whispered. Her PR manager nearly fainted, but Arthur, who was watching from the hallway, smiled quietly, a tear glistening in his eyes. Months passed. The media called her move career suicide. But something unexpected happened. Her company's culture began to change. Employees worked harder, loyalty soared, and Windsor Tech's reputation blossomed. Clients returned not for discounts, but because they trusted her again. Madeline often invited Arthur to her office for tea now. They'd sit by the window overlooking the city, a CEO and a janitor, talking about life. One evening, she asked, "Arthur, how did you stay so wise after losing everything?" He chuckled softly. "Losing everything teaches you what everything really is, ma'am." Madeline's eyes filled with tears. "You know, you've changed how I see success." Arthur smiled. "You just remembered who you were before the world told you who to be." Years later, Windsor Tech became one of the most socially responsible companies in the world. Madeline established a foundation for underprivileged workers and named it the Arthur Grant Initiative, after the man who had once cleaned her floors and reminded her of her humanity. And when people asked her what inspired her transformation, she'd always smile and say, it started with a janitor and a question I asked as a joke. If this story touched your heart, remember, wisdom doesn't come with a title. Sometimes, the people we overlook carry the lessons we need most. So if you believe in kindness, growth, and second chances, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that every person matters.